Hello, hello, friends and family in Pittsburgh and around the world. First of all, I wanted to remind everybody that my network is not just in Pittsburgh. I am connected to agents all over the country and all over the world. So some things are different, obviously, in different states, in different countries, of course. But if you are looking to buy or sell anywhere, I have the best people to help you. So I just want to remind you of that, even though I always say Pittsburgh and around the world. Because I sell here in Pittsburgh greater area, but I have connections everywhere. All right. So, what are we talking about today? We are talking about closing costs. And the reason we're talking about that is because so often people don't know how much money to bring to closing or how much money you need to buy a house. I feel like sometimes people think it's way more than needed. And sometimes, every once in a while, people think way less. So, first of all, sometimes people feel that I don't have that much money. I only have a couple $1,000s saved. That's okay. And I'll talk about that in a second. But also on the reverse side, just because you buy a house in cash for $200,000 does not mean your check at closing is 200,000. Now, let's talk about what some of the fees are. I want to talk first of all, when you put an offer in, and it's accepted, it's contingent on a few things. One of it's a home inspection. So you're going to have to pay for the home inspection up front. That's going to probably be $5 to $1,000. You have to put what's called hand money. It's a way of telling the seller that you're serious enough about the house that they should take the house off the market so that you can do your due diligence. That money ultimately goes towards your closing costs. But you do have to have the money up front. So these are some things that you need up front. The hand money, it depends on the sales price. It's all negotiable, but sellers like to see 5%. As a buyer's agent, you like to do 1%. So let's just say it's a $200,000 house, you would need 2,000. So there's several $1,000s you do need right off the bat, but let's face it, if you rent something, you're not going to go in with $0 either, okay? First month, last month, security deposit. That's thousands right there. And now you're buying into a home. So, what is the confusion about closing costs? And going back to the fact that, I help people from all over the world. People come in here and they are surprised by our low home prices. I mean, how low they are, but they are also surprised by our closing costs because we do have some higher closing costs than other places. So, what are some of the closing costs? As they say, there's no guarantee in life but death and taxes. So the government takes a percentage of the house price sale when you close. Every area is different. So it's a little overwhelming as an agent. But for example, the city of Pittsburgh is total of 5%. And both parties typically split that. So you're paying 2.5% just in taxes. And when I say up front, that's not until I'm sorry, not up front like a home inspection. That's at the closing table. So, like I said, there's a few things up front, which is going to be your home inspection and your hand money. But the other stuff, for the most part, is going to be sitting at the closing table. So, yes, the government wants to see a cut. City of Pittsburgh is extremely high percentage. A lot of the other municipalities and townships are about 1% each side, so 2% total. But let's just say you have a house you're buying for $200,000. You have to pay $2,000 in government taxes. Okay. So that's a fee right there. And that's the 1%. No, I didn't even do the math on the 2.5. Now, you also have to pay what's called title insurance. It is set by the state. The amount is set by the state. I know this isn't exciting, sexy stuff, but this is important. And you can always Google it based on the sales price. Now, if you pay cash, you don't have to do a title search or insurance. But here's the thing. Title search and insurance ensures that no one can come back later and say, wait a minute, you owe me money on this house from the previous owner, or this house actually belongs to someone else. So that is a very important thing. You never, ever, ever want to skip. And I've heard of someone who did, and then they found out they inherited someone else's lien, thousands and thousands of dollars. So that is not something you ever want to skip on. And that's also set by the state per the sales price. So none of this should really be a surprise. The other thing I do want to talk about now is several years ago, there was a lawsuit saying that the seller shouldn't have to pay all the commission for the buyer agents. And so the buyer agent obviously needs to get paid. And so it becomes a question of how do they get paid? I've been in the business 22 years. I never went to my buyer and asked them because I figured they had all these other fees and expenses. But we try to go to the seller, and we try to negotiate for the seller to pay those costs. And they typically do, but every once in a while they don't cover it completely. And so that's when we ask the buyer to cover it more too. Typically, and it depends on the sales price and the situation, that's 3%. But again, typically we ask the seller to pay. So there's a lot of fees up front, but no more honestly than renting, okay? If you're going to rent a place for $1,000 a month, first month security deposit and last month, that's $3,000. And you can barely find anything for rent at that price anyway. So here's the other thing. So there's all these closing costs on top of the price, right? And me, I'm not sure. I might be missing one or, there's a couple other little expenses, but those are the main ones. And I'll double check to see if I'm missing any other main ones. So I would say you want to estimate another 5, 10, 15,000 just in closing costs. Now, you might say, I don't have that plus a down payment for the house. And that's okay because there are ways to work around it. Okay. We can do what's called asking the seller for seller assist. So the seller assists with paying the closing costs. Now, sometimes sellers don't necessarily understand. They go, I don't want to assist them. Yes, but let's just say, for example, there's a house for 200,000 you're going to buy, and you don't have the closing costs that are $10,000. Just giving the example, random numbers. You can then increase the sales price to 210,000 and the seller pays the $10,000 seller assist. Good. This is all at closing, okay? And here again is why you need a trusted advisor. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to walk you through it. I'm here to help you. I'm here to get you in touch with the lender. Now, there are grants available too, depending on the income of the household and the neighborhood. However, like anything that comes to getting grants of any sort, it's not just going to be snap of the fingers. There are steps that you have to go through. There are going to be expectations, especially if it's a government grant. You have to have all your I's and your T's crossed, but it is available. And so that's the important part. I always think about a client of mine many years ago, and they literally got money at the closing table. Okay. They got a check at the closing table because the closing costs were paid for combination of a grant, a combination of the seller assist, and then with the hand money they had up front. So here's what I'll say. Don't be afraid of the math and don't be afraid because here's the thing. The lender, you will tell them how much money you have and they'll figure out what they can do for you. The other thing is, and I heard someone recently say, well, I don't want ultimately the loan to be, like I said, the example of 210 instead of 200. Now my loan, I'm going to owe more money. Okay, here's the deal, guys. We're talking about $10,000 over 30 years with a 6% interest rate. I mean, you're talking dollars, okay? Think about it. Credit cards, 25%. They expect the money now. This is 30 years. And in many cases, you should be able to get a tax deduction. No guarantees. That's another thing that you have to ask an accountant about. That's one other thing too. As your trusted advisor, I will get you in touch with the right people to help you, but I don't do the mortgages. I'm not the tax collector. I am not title insurance. But what I am is the whole package. So I'm going to help you get through this from step one to close. Okay. So again, I never want anybody to be surprised by closing costs. They exist. But here's the most important thing. You need to look into this up front. You need a trusted advisor and you have to ask them for a closing cost estimate sheet. If it's cash, the agent can do it. If it's a lender, the lender will do it. Closing cost estimate sheet. All right, I was going to show a little example of what one looked like, but I don't know if that's necessary. Is there any questions, Mia?
Actually, there is like a quick note. So if someone is buying around a 300,000 home and they don't have a ton of cash saved, what would they realistically need to bring to closing, and are there ways to lower that?
No, that is a very good question. And again, that's really going to be up to talking to the lender. So you need to, I have several very good lenders I can refer you to, and you let them know how much money you have, and then they'll figure out. Now, that being said, typically you need a 3% down payment. So that's $9,000 and maybe another 5,000 in closing costs. Again, we're just estimating. So 9,000 plus 5,000, you need about 14,000 total. Again, maybe more, maybe less. But if we ask the seller to help pay your closing costs, oh, I did want to mention one other thing, Mia. We forgot to mention with closing costs. You also have to pay your taxes and your insurance a year ahead. So now insurance has gotten quite expensive. It could be $1,500 for your insurance, but you're covered for the year. And if you have a mortgage, you do keep paying it through your mortgage company, but it's paying for the next year. Okay. So you have to pay certain things up front. But again, the seller, so let's just say it's 14,000 and you did 3% seller assist, you're now down to 5,000. Okay. So I don't want to say exact amounts here because it's really, really going to depend on your situation, your income, how much money you have. There's a lot of factors. And again, this is why you need a trusted advisor. This is really, really important. Any other questions?
Oh, yes. Our follow-up question, what's the biggest closing cost that surprises buyers the most, and how can they
Oh.
prepare for it ahead of time?
Hmm. I think all of them, to be honest with you, but I would say in the city of Pittsburgh, the fact that it's 2.5% each side, but obviously doesn't stop people because our prices are highest in the city of Pittsburgh. So it does work out. But let's just say, and I'm going to do a calculation here, you buy a $300,000 house, which is hard to buy in the city anymore, and you have to pay $7,500 for transfer tax. Okay. So I think that's something that would surprise people, especially coming from out of town. And it may or may not be deductible. You have to ask your accountant that. You may be able to deduct that out of your taxes. But I would think that's it. And also the title insurance. Again, you can check, you can always Google title insurance Pennsylvania and you look up the amount. You can use AI, it'll tell you, here's the amount. And so I think those are the things, and also the prepaid items, the upfront taxes and the upfront insurance. Because taxes, for example, I helped someone buy a house, sell a house in an area where the taxes for a $250,000 house were over $8,000. Now, if the buyer has to pay a year in advance, or whatever the lender requires, okay, the lender may say we only need 3 months in advance. But if they want a year in advance, that's an extra $8,000 too. So here's what I will say. It's hard to answer those questions on a broad basis. That's why you need to get a closing cost estimate sheet and talk to the right people. And I will refer you to all the right people. And if you talk to someone that's the wrong person, I will refer you to somebody else. I've been doing this 22 years. I've helped hundreds and hundreds of people. Anything else?
Now we don't have other questions. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And I just hope this is all helpful because I realize more and more that most people have the same questions and very similar questions, I should say. And I want everybody to have peace of mind. And I will say also, sometimes in fast-paced markets, like the one we're heading for in the spring, especially at certain price points and areas, it's fast-paced. So be prepared ahead of time. Do your research ahead of time and really evaluate your situation. That's why, as a buyer's agent, I like to meet with the buyer up front. I might show you a house or two, but ultimately, I want to then sit down and have a conversation about the process because the more you know up front, the better you're going to be throughout the process. Anything else?
No, we have no other questions in the queue.
All right, wonderful. Well, you guys all have a wonderful day, and I am always available to help. 412-657-3555. And I'm looking forward to the 70 degrees this weekend.